to the Union cause, because they had fought to free the slaves, and now their freedom was being compromised by the Black Codes. Now, beyond the Black Codes, remember we said they also, Northerners didn't like who the Southerners elected to office. They elected several ex-Confederates. And so basically, at this point, Congress wants to adjust Reconstruction under Johnson. Johnson sort of refuses to do this. And remember we said, Johnson vetoed renewing the Freedmen's Bureau, and Johnson vetoed a Civil Rights Act, and that eventually the conflict between Congress and Johnson explodes over the congressional passage of the 14th Amendment. Oh, just for fun, Emery, the 13th Amendment did what? Do you recall? Freed the slaves, correct? So the 14th Amendment does, the 14th Amendment is this Reconstruction Amendment. What does the 14th, dear Lindsay, what does the 14th Amendment do? So the 13th Amendment frees the slaves, the 14th Amendment made them citizens, right? So the 14th Amendment defines citizenship and prohibited states from denying equal protection under the law to American citizens. So slaves became citizens, and states were therefore mandated to offer those citizens equal protection under the law. Basically, what the 14th Amendment did is make the Black Codes illegal, correct? Or unconstitutional. Now, Johnson encouraged the Southern states not to ratify the 14th Amendment. Congress said that the Southern states would not be readmitted into the Union until they ratified the 14th Amendment. So a showdown ensued. What eventually settles the showdown? I mean, there's this sort of the showdown. Johnson saying, don't ratify the 14th Amendment. Congress saying, if you don't ratify the 14th Amendment, you won't be readmitted into the Union. The Southern states are in the middle. What's going to resolve it? Does anybody remember besides myself? And Amanda, I have a really, really good memory. But do you remember? Not yet. Not yet. Go ahead. Yes?
Johnson gave his speeches.
Johnson gave these, kind of these swing around the circle, but the swing around the circle eventually ends in the Congressional Elections of '66. And in the Congressional Elections of '66, a majority of congressmen that were sympathetic to the Republicans and the radicals were elected. Right? Remember, Johnson said, hey, vote for people that are going to support healing. And Congress said, no, vote for people who are going to support justice. Right? And in '66, they vote for justice. And the Republicans, now dominated to some extent ideologically by the radicals, take a supermajority in Congress, and what do? They throw out all the Reconstruction programs with Lincoln and Johnson, and they start their own program. Now, this is in March, this is the first Reconstruction Act, is in March of '67. That Reconstruction Act starts what we call Congressional Reconstruction, right? Now, what's central to the Congressional Reconstruction is the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment is ratified. The 14th Amendment is central to Congressional Reconstruction. African Americans are to be offered equal protection under the law. And we said that between 1867 and 1877, there is this remarkable period in the South where there are coalition governments of Republicans that sort of experiment with, Republican-type governments. Now remember, we said the players in these governments in radical Reconstruction were three groups. African Americans, who were enfranchised, or part of Congressional Reconstruction was that they had to be given the right to vote and participate in politics. Carpetbaggers and scallywags. Now, where were the carpetbaggers from, north or south?
North.
North. They were Northerners who came to the South. Where were the scallywags from, north or south? Say south. South. All right? What was the difference? Besides them being from different places, I should say this. What made the scallywags different from other Southerners? Yes, go ahead, Amanda. Yes, they supported the Republicans. They may have not supported secession in the first place. In some cases, they were ex-Confederates. But the scallywags, carpetbaggers, and the freed slaves were all Republicans. So in South Carolina, you had a Republican government that was dominated by these three groups. And the former ex-Confederates, in many cases, refused to vote, participate in office, but they did resist these governments. What was the big symbolic organization that represented the majority of the White South's resistance to these Republican coalition governments? Go ahead. Yes, the Ku Klux Klan. The Ku Klux Klan, remember we said, was a vigilante organization that was committed to overthrowing Republican rule in the South. Right? Now, you know, there's lots of discussion about, you know, Reconstruction and, you know, the success or failure about Reconstruction. And one of the things that is mentioned is that during Reconstruction, many of these Republican governments were corrupt. That there was corruption at different levels. And that certainly there's some accuracy to that. But remember, at the same time these governments are corrupt, we were talking about corruption in the North as well. You know, voting irregularities in the election of 76. And so the corruption, and that's not to justify the corruption of these governments, but it is to say, you know, it would have been unusual for these governments to somehow be free from corruption in the environment in which they existed. And we also mentioned that these governments did a lot of good things. They implemented a lot of things that the South had not previously implemented. And so the how we view the success or failures of these governments differs, you know, to some extent. Now, remember, when these radical regimes were put into place, Johnson did everything in his power to thwart the effort of Congress to do this. Eventually, that ends up in impeachment proceedings for Johnson. Remember, we said that Johnson was, in fact, impeached. He was not convicted. What was the central thing that Johnson was impeached for? They said he committed a high crime or misdemeanor. He should be removed from office. What did he do? Go ahead, Sarah. Yes. Johnson violated the Tenure of Office Act by dismissing the Secretary of War, Stanton. And that was central to at least the explicit reason why they wanted rid of him. Implicitly, and sort of under the surface, it was because he was resisting Reconstruction. Okay? Now, moving along nicely, Johnson, is not convicted. He is impeached, but he's not convicted, and this is May of '68. In November of '68, Ulysses S. Grant is elected to the presidency. But his election is dubious. You know, he's elected to the presidency, but in the popular vote, in order for him to get the majority, he gets most of the African American vote. Grant's election in '68 leads to the 15th Amendment. Now that's kind of bizarre. So Grant's elected, so they pass the 15th Amendment. Well, the Republicans are increasingly concerned that the South is going to return stronger, that the Democratic Party is going to be stronger with the South. So they are desperately attempting to maintain power. You know, radical Reconstruction is an attempt to do that, and so is the 15th Amendment. May tell the people what the 15th Amendment did.
It gave blacks the right to vote?
Yes. Basically, the 15th Amendment said you could not discriminate against people in terms of voting on the basis of color, males at least. Now, how does Reconstruction end? Does anybody besides the instructor remember how Reconstruction ends? How does the whole thing end? I mean, we say, okay, it starts in 1877, it starts in 1867, it ends in 1877. It ends with what? Go ahead, Natalie. O'Toole, is that your first name, Natalie? No, it is not. What is your first name?
Sarah.
Sarah, okay, that's right. Sarah, it is not. Go ahead, Sarah. I don't want to call. Is there somebody else named that?
Natalie.
Okay, go ahead.